The morning Elias Mercer nearly burned down his own ranch kitchen, he didn't know his life was about to change forever. Smoke billowed through the adobe walls as he cursed over another ruined breakfast, the third that week. His cattle empire was thriving, but he couldn't fry an egg to save his soul. Then she walked in, a Boston woman with fire in her eyes and flour on her hands, speaking words that would echo through his heart for years to come. "Move over, cowboy. I'll stir the pot. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels." The New Mexico sun had barely crested the Jemez Mountains when the smell of burning lard filled the morning air at the Mercer Ranch. It was a scent that had become altogether too familiar in recent weeks, acrid, bitter, and utterly unappetizing. Inside the kitchen, Elias Mercer stood over a cast-iron skillet, watching helplessly as another batch of eggs transformed from golden promise into charcoal disaster. "Damn it all to hell," he muttered, yanking the pan off the cook stove with his bare hand, then immediately dropping it with a clatter that echoed through the empty house. He shook his burned fingers and glared at the ruined breakfast as if it had personally offended him. The eggs weren't just burned, they were obliterated, fused to the bottom of the skillet in a blackened mass that would require a chisel and divine intervention to remove. This was his life now. Elias Mercer, owner of one of the most successful cattle operations in the New Mexico territory, brought to his knees by breakfast. It hadn't always been this way. For 5 years old, Cookie Patterson had run his kitchen with military precision, producing meals that kept his ranch hands happy and productive. Cookie could stretch a side of beef into a week's worth of satisfying meals, could make beans taste like a delicacy, and somehow always had fresh biscuits ready when the men came in from the range. Then Cookie's daughter in Kansas City had taken ill, and the old man had packed his bags without a moment's hesitation. "Family comes first, boss," he'd said, and Elias couldn't argue with that. He'd even given Cookie an extra month's wages and promised his job would be waiting if he ever returned. That had been 6 weeks ago. 6 long, hungry, smoke-filled weeks. Elias had tried to hire a replacement. Lord knows he'd tried. But competent cooks were rarer than gold nuggets in these parts, and the few who passed through town took one look at his remote ranch 12 miles from Los Alamos, surrounded by nothing but sagebrush and sky, and politely declined. The last applicant, a grizzled prospector who claimed to have cooked in mining camps across 3 territories, had lasted exactly 1 day before declaring Elias's kitchen cursed by vengeful spirits and fleeing in the night. So Elias had taken matters into his own hands with predictably catastrophic results. He'd burned oatmeal, burned beans, burned coffee so badly that even his horse had refused to drink it. He'd somehow managed to burn soup, an achievement that defied the laws of nature and physics. His ranch hands had taken to eating in shifts at the Los Alamos Hotel, paying for meals out of their own wages rather than risk whatever smoking disaster awaited them at the ranch. Elias couldn't blame them. He'd been doing the same thing himself, riding into town for breakfast and dinner, returning to the ranch only to sleep and oversee the operation during daylight hours. It was expensive, time-consuming, and utterly humiliating for a man who prided himself on self-sufficiency. Now standing in his smoke-filled kitchen at dawn, nursing burned fingers and staring at ruins that had once been eggs, Elias Mercer felt the full weight of his domestic inadequacy settle over his shoulders like a heavy saddle blanket. He was 34 years old, 6 feet 2 inches of weathered muscle and sun-darkened skin, with hands that could rope a steer or gentle a spooked horse with equal skill. He'd built this ranch from nothing, surviving drought, harsh winters, and occasional conflicts with rustlers. He could read the sky for weather-judge cattle by sight and negotiate prices with the shrewdest buyers in Santa Fe. But he could not, under any circumstances, prepare an edible meal. "You look like a man contemplating surrender," a voice called from the doorway. Elias spun around, instinctively reaching for the gun belt he'd hung on a chair, then stopped when he recognized Thomas Cole, the owner of Cole's General Store in Los Alamos. Thomas was a portly man in his late 50s with a generous mustache and kind eyes that perpetually crinkled at the corners as if he found the whole world gently amusing. "Thomas," Elias said, relaxing slightly, "didn't hear you ride up." "I suspect you couldn't hear a buffalo stampede over all that coughing and cursing you were doing." Thomas stepped into the kitchen, waving away smoke. "Good Lord, Elias, what did those eggs ever do to you?" "They resisted cooking," Elias said grimly. "I took it personal. Thomas laughed a deep belly laugh that seemed too large for the early morning hour. I heard in town you've been having some culinary difficulties. Thought I'd ride out and see if the rumors were true. They're true. Elias gestured at the smoking skillet. And getting worse. At this rate, I'll burn the whole damn ranch down trying to make breakfast. Well, then, it's fortunate I brought a solution. Thomas turned toward the door and called out, Marion, you can come in now. Elias frowned. Marion, my niece, Thomas explained. She arrived on yesterday's stage from Boston. Her mother, my sister Catherine, sent her west for a change of scenery, shall we say. And as it happens, the girl can cook like an angel descended from heaven itself. A figure appeared in the doorway, and Elias felt something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. She was perhaps 25, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun that nonetheless couldn't quite contain her curls. She wore a traveling dress of deep green that had seen better days dusty from the stage journey, and carried a worn leather satchel. But it was her eyes that caught him intelligent, assessing with a directness that suggested she was accustomed to making her own judgments about people and situations. Those eyes swept across his kitchen, taking in the smoking skillet, the dishes piled in the wash basin, the flour scattered across every surface, and the general chaos that Elias had grown too defeated to address. One dark eyebrow arched slightly. My uncle wasn't exaggerating. Marion Cole, meet Elias Mercer, Thomas said cheerfully. Elias, this is my niece, best cook in Boston, or so her mother claims. I've tasted her bread, and I believe it. Ma'am, Elias said, suddenly aware that he was covered in soot. His hair was standing on end, and he probably smelled like a chimney fire. Not exactly the impression a man wanted to make on a lady. Pleasure to meet you. Is it? Marion asked, and there was something in her tone, not quite amusement, not quite challenge, that made Elias straighten his spine. Because, from where I'm standing, you look like a man who's about to declare defeat and live on raw carrots for the rest of his natural life. Thomas coughed clearly, trying to hide a laugh. Marion has a direct way of speaking. I have an honest way of speaking, Marion corrected. She set down her satchel and walked directly to the cook stove, peering at the ruined eggs with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a patient. How long did you leave this on the heat? I'm not sure, Elias admitted. I was trying to make coffee at the same time, and you can't divide your attention. Marion nodded as if this confirmed a diagnosis. Classic mistake. You're thinking like a rancher trying to do 6 things at once. But cooking requires focus, especially when you're learning. I'm not learning, Elias said irritably. I'm failing repeatedly. That's the same thing. Marion picked up the skillet, examined the carbonized eggs, and made a soft tisking sound. This needs to soak for several hours before anyone can salvage it. Do you have another pan? 3 more, Elias said. All in the same condition. Marion turned to look at him fully, and for a moment something that might have been sympathy flickered across her face. You really are desperate, aren't you? I prefer the term strategically challenged, Elias said. This time she did smile, just a small quirk at the corner of her mouth, but it transformed her entire face. Well, Mr. Mercer, it appears you need help. And as it happens, I need a place to stay and honest work to do. My uncle suggested this might be mutually beneficial. You're offering to be my cook. Elias looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. I'm offering to save you from death by malnutrition, Marion said, and possibly from burning down this lovely ranch. Those seem like worthy goals. Elias hesitated. It wasn't proper having an unmarried woman living on his ranch, even if she was Thomas's niece. People would talk. In a small town like Los Alamos, people always talked. But then again, people were already talking about his pathetic domestic skills, about his smoking kitchen, about the fact that a grown man couldn't manage basic survival tasks without help. There's a small cottage, he found himself saying, about 100 yards from the main house. It's where Cookie used to stay. It's clean private, has its own entrance. You'd have your own space. And meals, Marion asked. I'd be cooking for how many myself and usually 4 ranch hands, sometimes 6 depending on the season. Breakfast before dawn, lunch at noon, dinner at sunset. Elias mentally calculated. I can pay $30 a month plus room and board. That's fair wages. 35 tas, Marion countered immediately. And I get one afternoon a week to visit my uncle in town. Elias blinked. Women in Boston apparently negotiated like cattle traders. Done. Then we have an agreement. Marion extended her hand, not a delicate limp gesture, but a firm handshake like a business partner. Her grip was surprisingly strong. When do I start? Right now, Elias said, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. If you think you can do anything with what's left in the larder. Marion released his hand and rolled up her sleeves, revealing forearms that were pale compared to his sun-weathered skin, but looked capable enough. Mr. Mercer, I survived 3 years teaching cooking classes to wealthy women who thought butter was made by magic fairies. I can work with anything. Now, she pointed at him. Move over, I'll stir the pot. Something in the way she said it with absolute confidence and zero hesitation made Elias step aside without argument. He watched as she moved through his kitchen with purposeful efficiency, opening cabinets, checking the larder, assessing what she had to work with. Your stores are low, she observed, but workable. Thomas, did you bring those supplies I asked about? In the wagon, Thomas confirmed. I'll start unloading. I'll help, Elias offered, grateful for something useful to do. As he and Thomas hauled in sacks of flour, sugar, cornmeal, and other provisions, Elias found himself sneaking glances through the kitchen window. Marion had tied an apron around her waist and was moving with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She'd opened windows to clear the smoke, had water heating on the stove, and was already mixing something in a large bowl. She's running from heartbreak, Thomas said quietly as they carried in the last sack. Fellow in Boston, a banker's son, very respectable, very well connected. They were engaged. Then she discovered he was courting another woman's fortune on the side with promises that contradicted the ones he'd made to Marion. Elias grunted, not sure what to say to that. She seems to be handling it well, because she's got steel in her spine, that one. Gets it from her mother, my sister. But Catherine thought a change of scenery might do her good, and I agreed. Let her heal somewhere new, somewhere she can be useful instead of pitied. Thomas clapped Elias on the shoulder. You'll treat her well, won't you? She's family. I'll treat her respectfully, Elias promised. You have my word. That's all I ask. Thomas glanced at the house. Though between you and me, I think this might be good for both of you. She needs honest work and distance from painful memories. You need someone to keep you from starving to death. Appreciate the vote of confidence, Elias said dryly. By the time they finished unloading, the kitchen had been transformed. The smoke had cleared, the windows were open, and the most incredible smell was drifting through the house, something involving bacon, eggs, and what might have been fresh bread, though Elias couldn't fathom how she'd made bread so quickly. It's just biscuits, Marion said when he voiced this thought. Quick recipe. They'll be ready in 10 minutes. She'd set the table, actually set it with plates and forks and everything, not the haphazard arrangement of dinnerware that Elias usually managed. There was coffee brewing that actually smelled like coffee instead of burned regret. And in the skillet, eggs were cooking to a perfect golden yellow alongside thick slices of bacon that sizzled gently. How did you? Elias started. Temperature control, Marion said, not looking up from her work. And attention, you were cooking too hot and too fast. Patience is half of cooking well. Thomas laughed. I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Marion, your trunk is in the wagon. Elias, show her to the cottage when you're ready. After Thomas left, an awkward silence settled over the kitchen. Elias stood uncertainly, not sure if he should sit down or help or simply stay out of the way. He settled for leaning against the doorframe, watching as Marion plated the food with careful precision. You can sit, she said without turning around. This isn't a restaurant. You don't have to wait for me to serve you. Elias sat. A moment later, she placed a plate in front of him that looked like something from a professional establishment. Perfectly cooked eggs, crispy bacon, and 2 golden biscuits that were still steaming. Coffee, she asked. Please. She poured him a cup, then made herself a plate and sat down across from him. For a moment, they both just looked at the food. You're staring, Marion observed. I'm in shock, Elias admitted. This is the first real breakfast I've seen in 6 weeks. Then eat it before it gets cold. He did. The first bite of egg was such a revelation that he actually closed his eyes. It tasted like butter and herbs and perfection. The bacon was crispy without being burned, and the biscuit practically melted in his mouth, light and fluffy, and still warm from the oven. "This is incredible," he said around a mouthful of food, then remembered his manners. "Sorry, this is incredible, ma'am." "Marion," she corrected. "If we're going to be working together, let's dispense with the formalities. And thank you." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Elias found himself studying her when he thought she wasn't looking. There were shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. Her traveling dress, though well made, had been mended in several places, and there was a tightness around her mouth that spoke of carefully controlled emotion. She'd been hurt. Thomas had said as much. But she wasn't broken. That much was clear in the way she held herself, the efficiency of her movements, the directness of her gaze. "Why did you really come west?" he asked suddenly. Marion looked up from her plate, those intelligent eyes meeting his. For a moment he thought she might deflect or lie. Then she sighed. "Because in Boston I was a cautionary tale," she said simply. "Poor Marion Cole jilted by the banker's son. Poor Marion who thought she'd found love but found only a fortune hunter. Every tea party, every social call, every sympathetic glance, it all reminded me of my own foolishness. I couldn't breathe there anymore." "That doesn't sound foolish," Elias said. "Sounds like you trusted someone who didn't deserve it, which is the definition of foolishness." But her expression softened slightly. "Still, my uncle wrote that he had plenty of work in Los Alamos, that the territory was full of opportunities for someone willing to work hard. And I'm very willing to work hard, Mr. Mercer. I need to be useful. I need to be something other than a subject of pity." "Call me Elias," he said. "And for what it's worth, anyone who could walk into my disaster of a kitchen and produce this," he gestured at his empty plate, "is the opposite of pitiable. You're damn near miraculous." She laughed at that, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her. "Well, I don't know about miraculous, but I can promise you won't starve as long as I'm here." "That's all I'm asking." After breakfast, Elias showed her to the cottage. It was a simple adobe structure with a main room, a small bedroom, and its own fireplace. Cookie had kept it neat, and Elias had made sure it was clean before Marion arrived, but it still felt sparse and masculine. "I know it's not much," he started. "It's perfect," Marion interrupted, setting down her satchel. "It's quiet, it's private, and it's mine. That's more than I've had in months." They spent the rest of the morning getting her settled. Elias brought in her trunk from Thomas's wagon, helped her arrange furniture, and made sure the cottage had everything she needed. By noon, Marion declared herself ready to start preparing lunch for the ranch hands. "They're not expecting much," Elias warned. "They've been eating in town for weeks." "Then I'll surprise them," Marion said confidently. She did. When the 4 ranch hands came in for lunch, tired, dusty, and clearly expecting another excuse about burned food, they stopped dead in the doorway at the sight and smell of Marion's spread. She'd made beef stew that had been simmering all morning with fresh bread and dried apple cobbler for dessert. "Boss won't," said Pete Henshaw, the oldest of the hands, who died and left us a feast. "Nobody died," Elias said. "This is Marion Cole, our new cook. Marion, this is Pete, Jake, Sam, and that young fool is Danny." "Ma'am," they chorused, suddenly self-conscious about their dusty clothes and trail-worn appearance. "Sit down and eat while it's hot," Marion said briskly, "and wipe your feet first. I just cleaned that floor." They obeyed like schoolboys, and Elias hid a smile. Within minutes, the only sounds in the kitchen were appreciative eating noises and the occasional request to pass the bread. "This is the best thing I've eaten in years," Jake declared. "Actual years." "Cookie was good, but this is something else," Sam agreed. Danny, the youngest at 19, looked at Marion with open worship. "Will you marry me?" "No," Marion said, without looking up from her own plate. "Worth a try," Danny muttered, and the others laughed. After lunch, as the hands headed back to work, Pete lingered behind. "Boss, if you let this one get away, we're staging a mutiny, just so you know." "Noted, Elias said. The afternoon passed in a peaceful rhythm that felt almost dreamlike after weeks of chaos. Marian worked in the kitchen preparing dinner and taking inventory of what she needed from town. Elias caught up on ranch paperwork, balanced his books, and found himself accomplishing more than he had in weeks, partly because he wasn't distracted by hunger, and partly because knowing there would be an actual edible dinner waiting gave him something to look forward to. At sunset, they gathered for dinner, another impressive meal of roasted chicken potatoes and fresh vegetables that Marian had somehow conjured from his depleted stores. The conversation flowed more easily now, with the ranch hands telling stories and Marian asking questions about the territory, about ranching, about everything with genuine curiosity. She fit, Elias realized. After just one day, she fit into the rhythm of the ranch as if she'd always been there. After dinner, after the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was cleaned, Elias found Marian sitting on the porch of her cottage, looking out at the sunset painting the Jemez Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "First day survived," he said, approaching carefully. "How are you holding up?" "Exhausted," she admitted. "But good exhausted. Useful exhausted." She glanced at him. "Thank you for this opportunity, Elias. You didn't have to take a chance on me." "I didn't take a chance," he said. "I made the smartest business decision of my life. If you'd seen what I'd been eating for the past 6 weeks, you'd understand." She smiled at that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "It's beautiful here," Marian said softly. "So different from Boston. So much space. So much sky. Does it feel like home yet?" "Not yet," she said. "But it feels like it could be. Like maybe given time, I could build something new here. Something that's mine." Elias nodded, understanding completely. He'd felt the same way when he first came to New Mexico, like the wide open spaces gave him room to become someone different, someone better. "Then welcome to the Mercer Ranch, Marian Cole," he said. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "I hope we both do," she replied. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Elias felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air and everything to do with the woman sitting beside him who had walked into his smoke-filled kitchen that morning and changed everything with 4 simple words: "Move over, I'll stir the pot." He didn't know it yet, but those words would echo through his life for years to come. A promise, a challenge, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find in the New Mexico territory. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Marian rose before dawn, her cottage lamp glowing like a beacon in the pre-morning darkness. And by the time Elias emerged from the main house, the kitchen would already be warm with the smell of coffee and whatever miracle she was preparing for breakfast. The ranch hands began arriving early, drawn not just by hunger, but by the sense of home that Marian had somehow woven into that kitchen, a warmth that went beyond the cook stove. Something in the way she remembered how Pete liked his eggs, or that young Danny had a weakness for anything sweet. Elias found himself lingering longer at meals, inventing reasons to pass through the kitchen during the day. He told himself it was practical he needed to discuss supply orders, or ask about dietary preferences, or check if she needed anything from town. But the truth which he was trying hard not to examine too closely was that he simply enjoyed being near her. Marian had a way of moving through the world that fascinated him. She was efficient without being hurried, confident without being arrogant, and possessed a dry wit that caught him off guard at the most unexpected moments. When Sam accidentally knocked over an entire pot of beans one afternoon, destroying 2 hours of cooking, Marian had simply looked at the spreading mess and said, "Well, I suppose the floor was getting hungry too." The ranch hands had laughed until they cried, and even Sam had grinned sheepishly while helping clean up. But it was the quiet moments that Elias treasured most. The evenings when he'd find her on her cottage porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in impossible colors. She'd started keeping a journal, writing letters home to her mother that she'd read aloud sometimes if he asked carefully edited versions he suspected that emphasized the beauty of the territory and downplayed her lingering heartache. "My mother worries," Marian explained one evening as they sat together, the day's heat finally breaking into cool relief. "She thinks I ran away instead of healing. Maybe she's right." "You didn't run away," Elias said. "You chose something different. That's not the same thing." Isn't it? Marion set down her pen, her expression thoughtful in the fading light. I left everything familiar, everyone I knew. I came 2,000 miles to cook for cowboys in a place I'd never heard of before Uncle Thomas mentioned it. If that's not running, what is it? Courage, Elias said simply. Most people who get hurt just shrink, make themselves smaller, build walls. You got on a stage and rode into the unknown. That's about the bravest thing I can imagine. She looked at him, then really looked at him, and something passed between them, a recognition, an understanding that neither was quite ready to name. You're a surprising man, Elias Mercer. How's that? Most men I've known don't think women can be brave. They think we're delicate things that need protecting from the world's sharp edges. She smiled slightly. You treat me like I'm capable. That's because you are, Elias said. Watching you work is like watching a general command an army. You're organized, strategic, completely in control. Hell, you've got Pete and the boys following orders better than I ever managed. Marion laughed at that, a sound that Elias was learning to treasure. That's because I feed them well. Men are remarkably obedient when properly fed. Is that your secret? One of them. Her smile faded slightly. The other is that I don't give them reason to doubt me. I learned that in Boston, teaching those cooking classes. Women are always being doubted, our competence, our intelligence, our capabilities. So you have to be twice as good and half as apologetic. Never waver. Never second-guess yourself out loud, even if you're terrified inside. Are you? Elias asked. Terrified, I mean. Marion was quiet for a long moment, considering. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the cottage, I wonder what I'm doing here. If I made a terrible mistake. If I should have stayed in Boston and faced the whispers and the pity until they eventually faded. She met his eyes. But then morning comes and I step into that kitchen and I remember that here I'm not poor Marion the jilted girl. Here I'm just Marion the cook. And that's enough. For now, that's enough. Elias wanted to tell her that she was more than just a cook, that in the short time she'd been at the ranch, she'd become essential in ways that had nothing to do with food. That he found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day, wondering what she was doing, what she was thinking. That the ranch hands weren't the only ones who'd become remarkably obedient when she was around. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, I'm glad you're here, Marion. This place is better with you in it. Better organized, you mean? She said lightly, but he could see the pleasure in her expression. Your ledgers were a disaster. I reorganized your entire supply system last week. I noticed, and I appreciate it. He hesitated, then added, but that's not what I meant. Before she could respond, Danny came running up from the bunkhouse, his face flushed with excitement. Boss Pete says there's a dust cloud on the south road. Looks like riders coming in. Elias stood immediately, his hand instinctively going to his gun belt. Unexpected visitors could mean anything from cattle buyers to trouble, and it paid to be prepared. How many? Well, Pete thinks 3, maybe 4. I'll go see. Elias glanced at Marion. Might be nothing, but stay close to the house until we know who it is. She nodded, rising as well. Should I prepare something, in case they're staying? Let's see who they are first, Elias said, already striding toward the main house where he could get a better view of the approaching riders. Pete was waiting on the porch, one hand shading his eyes against the late-day sun. Could be the Martinsons, he said as Elias joined him. They mentioned stopping by to discuss spring calves. But as the riders drew closer, Elias felt a prickle of unease. The lead rider sat his horse with the rigid posture of someone unaccustomed to long days in the Saddle City posture, East Coast posture. And the horse itself was too fine for ranch work, clearly a rental from the Los Alamos livery. That's not Martinson, Elias said quietly. The riders entered the yard and Elias counted 3 of them, the lead rider in city clothes flanked by 2 men who had the look of hired help. The lead rider was perhaps 30, with carefully groomed dark hair and expensive boots that had never seen a day's real work. He surveyed the ranch with the calculating gaze of someone appraising property for purchase. Good evening, the man called out, his accent unmistakably Eastern. I'm looking for the Mercer Ranch. I was told I'd find it here. You found it, Elias said, not moving from the porch. I'm Elias Mercer. What can I do for you? The man dismounted with the careful movements of someone not quite comfortable on horseback, then brushed dust from his jacket with obvious distaste. "Edward Blackwell," he said, extending a hand. "Recently arrived from Boston. I'm looking for someone, and I believe you might be able to help me." Elias descended the porch steps and shook the offered hand, noting its softness. No calluses, no rough edges from work. "Who are you looking for?" "A young woman named Marion Cole. I was told by the proprietor of the general store in Los Alamos that she's been working here." Edward's smile was practiced charming, completely insincere. "I've come a very long way to find her." Every instinct Elias possessed was suddenly screaming danger. This was the banker's son, the man who'd broken Marion's heart. This was the source of the pain she carried so carefully, the reason she'd fled 2,000 miles into the territory. And he'd followed her. "Miss Cole is employed here," Elias said carefully, his voice neutral. "But I'm not in the habit of discussing my employees with strangers. What's your business with her?" Edward's smile widened, though it never reached his eyes. "My business is personal, Mr. Mercer. Marion and I have unfinished matters to discuss. I'm sure she'll want to see me." "I'm quite sure she won't," said a voice from behind them, and Elias turned to see Marion standing at the corner of the house. She'd removed her apron and her spine was rigid, her face carefully composed into a mask of cool politeness that didn't quite hide the fury burning in her eyes. "Hello, Edward." "Marion." Edward's expression shifted into something that might have been meant to convey affection, but came across as possessive instead. "You're looking well. The western air agrees with you." "What are you doing here?" Marion asked, each word precisely enunciated. "I came to bring you home, of course." Edward moved toward her, but Elias subtly shifted his position to remain between them. Edward noticed his eyes narrowing slightly. "We need to talk, Marion, privately." "We have nothing to discuss," Marion said flatly. "I believe I made my feelings quite clear in the letter I sent before I left Boston." "The letter you sent after you fled without giving me a chance to explain." Edward's tone suggested infinite patience with an unreasonable child. "If you just listen to reason—" "I listened to the woman you were courting while engaged to me," Marion interrupted. "She was quite detailed about your promises to her, about how you were only marrying me for my father's business connections, and once you'd secured them, you planned to keep her as a mistress. She seemed to find it all very romantic." The mask of charm slipped from Edward's face for just a moment, revealing something calculating and cold beneath. Then it was back smooth as ever. "That woman was a liar and a troublemaker. I thought you'd realize that once you'd calmed down." "I've had 6 weeks to calm down," Marion said, "and I'm quite calm now. Calm enough to recognize that coming here was the best decision I've ever made. I have a good position, I'm valued for my work, and I'm 2,000 miles away from you. That last part is my favorite." Pete had emerged from the barn, and Elias could see Sam and Jake watching from the bunkhouse doorway. The ranch hands might not know the full story, but they could recognize trouble when they saw it, and they were positioning themselves accordingly. Edward's smile had frozen into something brittle. "Marion, be reasonable. You can't seriously intend to spend your life cooking for cowboys in this godforsaken wilderness. You're a Cole, you have position expectations, a place in society. Come back to Boston where you belong." "This is where I belong," Marion said quietly, and Elias heard the absolute conviction in her voice. "Here, doing honest work for honest people. I've never been happier, Edward, and I have you to thank for it. If you hadn't betrayed me, I'd never have discovered how much I was settling." Something dangerous flickered in Edward's eyes. "Your father won't approve of this. He sent me to retrieve you." "My father knows exactly where I am," Marion said. "I've been writing to my mother weekly. If he wanted me home, he could have sent a letter. Instead, he sent you, which tells me he's as tired of your presence in Boston as I am." "You're being hysterical. And you're trespassing," Elias cut in, his voice hard. "Miss Cole has made her position clear. I think it's time you headed back to town." Edward turned to him, all pretense of civility dropping away. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Mercer. This is between Marion and myself." "She's under my employ and protection," Elias said. "That makes it my concern. You've had your say. She's not interested. Now you can ride out peacefully, or I can have my men escort you to the property line. Your choice." For a long moment, Edward's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. Then he smoothed his expression and turned back to Marion. Very well. I can see you need more time to come to your senses. I'm staying at the Los Alamos Hotel. When you're ready to discuss this like a rational adult, you know where to find me. Don't wait up, Marion said. Edward mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements, then wheeled the animal around with more force than necessary. His hired men followed suit. Before riding off, Edward looked back at Elias with barely concealed hostility. You should be careful, Mr. Mercer. Getting between a man and his intended wife can be dangerous. She's not your intended anything, Elias said flatly. And if you come back here uninvited, we're going to have a different kind of conversation, one that doesn't involve words. Edward's jaw tightened, but he apparently had enough sense not to push further. With a final venomous look at Marion, he spurred his horse toward the road, his companions trailing behind him. They all stood in silence, watching the dust cloud fade into the evening light. Then Pete cleared his throat. Want us to keep watch tonight, boss? That fellow didn't strike me as the type to accept no gracefully. Good idea, Elias said. Rotate shifts. And Pete, if he comes back, you come get me immediately. Don't try to handle him yourselves. Yes, sir. Pete headed toward the bunkhouse, already organizing the watch schedule in his head. When they were alone, Elias turned to Marion. She was still standing rigidly, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said automatically, then seemed to deflate. No, I'm not fine. I'm furious and terrified. And, God, I thought I'd escaped this. How did he even know where to find me? Your uncle probably mentioned you were working at a ranch, Elias said gently. Small town like Los Alamos wouldn't be hard to figure out which one. I should have known he wouldn't just let me go. Marion's voice shook slightly. Edward doesn't like losing things he considers his, and he considers me his no matter what I say about it. You're not a thing, Elias said firmly. You're a person, and you get to decide where you go and who you spend your time with. If you can't understand that, he's a fool. Marion looked up at him, and in her eyes, Elias saw a vulnerability she'd never shown before. The fear beneath the competence, the uncertainty beneath the confidence. What if he doesn't leave? What if he causes trouble? Then we'll deal with it, Elias promised. Together. You're not alone in this, Marion. Something in her expression shifted, softened. Thank you for standing with me, for not believing his nonsense about needing to talk privately, for treating me like I have a right to make my own decisions. You do have that right, Elias said, and for what it's worth, I meant what I said earlier. This place is better with you in it. We're not giving you up without a fight. The evening shadows were lengthening around them, and somewhere in the distance, Danny was lighting the lanterns in the bunkhouse. The familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the night provided a comforting backdrop to the turmoil of the last hour. I should finish dinner preparations, Marion said finally, though she made no move toward the kitchen. The men will be hungry soon. The men can wait, Elias said. Are you sure you're all right? Marion took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and Elias watched as she visibly gathered her composure. I will be. I need a moment to remind myself that I'm not in Boston anymore, that Edward has no power over me here. He doesn't, Elias confirmed, and if he tries to claim otherwise, he'll learn very quickly how we handle bullies in the territory. That earned him a small, shaky smile. My fierce cowboy protector. More like your employer who doesn't tolerate harassment of his staff, Elias said, though his heart jumped strangely at the word my in her sentence. But yeah, that too. The next few days passed with a tension that hung over the ranch like summer heat. Edward didn't return to the property, but his presence in Los Alamos was felt nonetheless. Word filtered back through Thomas that Edward was making inquiries around town, asking questions about Marion, about the ranch, about Elias himself. He was staying at the hotel, apparently in no hurry to return to Boston, and had made himself visible at the saloon and general store playing the part of the concerned fiancé, worried about his wayward beloved. He's spreading stories, but Thomas reported one afternoon when he rode out with supplies. Nothing overtly slanderous, but implications. suggesting Marion isn't in her right mind, that she's been influenced by unscrupulous people, that she needs to be rescued from her own poor judgment. Can we stop him? Elias asked, his jaw tight with anger. Not legally, not unless he makes specific false claims we can disprove. Thomas looked troubled. The problem is he's playing on people's assumptions. A woman alone in the territory working on a ranch with men, some folks are already inclined to think the worst. The worst being what exactly? Marion asked. She'd been listening from the kitchen doorway, her expression carefully neutral. Thomas hesitated. That your relationship with Elias is improper, that you're being taken advantage of, that a respectable woman wouldn't choose this life unless she'd been coerced or confused. People are idiots, Marion said flatly, present company accepted. The good news is most folks in Los Alamos know better, Thomas added quickly. You've made friends at church, Marion. Mrs. Henderson speaks highly of you, and when she approves, others follow. But Edward's presence is uncomfortable. He's the kind of man people want to believe well-spoken, well-dressed claims to have noble intentions. His intentions are about as noble as a snake's, Marion muttered. That evening after dinner, Elias found Marion standing at the fence line, looking out toward the mountains. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple painting, everything in soft gold. He's not going to stop, is he? She asked without turning around. Doesn't seem like it, Elias admitted, joining her at the fence. But he can't stay here forever. Eventually he'll have to go back to Boston. Unless he succeeds in convincing people I'm unfit to make my own decisions. Marion's hands gripped the fence rail tightly. Men like Edward don't give up easily. They're used to getting what they want, and they're very good at making others see things their way. What do you want to do? Elias asked. I want to ignore him until he goes away, Marion said. But I don't think that's going to work. They stood in silence, watching the light fade. Then Marion spoke again, her voice quieter. May I ask you something personal? Of course. Why haven't you married? She glanced at him, then away. You're successful, respected, certainly not unpleasant to look at. I'd think women would be lining up. Elias chuckled, despite the tension of the evening. Not many women want to live 12 miles from the nearest town on a working ranch. It's not an easy life. But there must have been someone, in all your years here. He was quiet for a long moment, considering. There was, once, a woman named Sarah. We met at a dance in Santa Fe about 5 years ago. She was visiting family, thinking about staying in the territory. We courted for a while, talked about marriage even. What happened? She met the ranch, Elias said simply. Saw what life would actually be like, the isolation, the work, the unpredictability. She was honest about it, which I appreciated. Told me she'd thought she wanted adventure, but realized she needed society more. Last I heard, she'd married a lawyer in Albuquerque. And you never tried again. Didn't see the point, Elias admitted. The ranch is my life. I'm not interested in changing that for someone who can't appreciate it. And I'm definitely not interested in trying to convince someone to accept a life they don't want. He paused. Seems to me that never ends well. Like Edward trying to force me back to Boston, Marion said. Exactly like that. She was quiet then, said softly, Thank you. For what? For understanding that I get to choose, that my choice matters. She turned to face him fully, and in the fading light, her eyes seemed to glow. You have no idea how rare that is, Elias. Most men I've known believe women are incapable of knowing their own minds, that we need guidance protection from our own foolishness. You've never once suggested, I don't know what I want. That's because you clearly do, Elias said. You're one of the most capable people I've ever met, Marion, man or woman. The idea that you need someone else making decisions for you is insulting. Edward would call that dangerous thinking, Marion said with a slight smile, encouraging women's independence. Then Edward's a damn fool, Elias said, which we already knew. She laughed at that, and some of the tension eased from her shoulders. They stood together as the stars began to emerge, and Elias was acutely aware of how close she was standing, close enough that he could smell the flour and cinnamon that always seemed to cling to her, close enough to see the way the evening breeze caught strands of her hair. I should head to the cottage, Marion said eventually, but she didn't move. Should I walk you? Elias offered. It's 100 yards in clear sight of the house, she pointed out. But yes, I'd like that. They walked slowly, neither in any particular hurry to end the evening. At her door, Marian paused. Elias, I know this situation with Edward is complicated. If it becomes a problem for the ranch, if his presence causes trouble for you, I'll understand if you need to reconsider my employment. Don't, Elias said immediately. Don't even think that. You're not going anywhere unless you choose to, and certainly not because some pompous ass from Boston is making noise. We'll figure this out. Marian repeated softly. I like the sound of that. So do I, Elias admitted, and meant it more than he'd intended to reveal. 3 days later, during the weekly trip to town for supplies, the situation escalated. Marian had accompanied Elias and Pete to Los Alamos, needing to discuss specific provisions with Thomas and make arrangements for the upcoming month. They'd split up to accomplish their errands more efficiently. Pete to the feed store, Elias to the bank, Marian to her uncle's store. Elias was concluding his business when he heard raised voices from the street. He stepped outside to see a small crowd gathering near the general store, and his blood ran cold when he recognized Edward's voice carrying over the others. Simply concerned for her welfare, Edward was saying, his tone dripping with false sincerity. A woman alone living in close quarters with unmarried men. Surely you can understand a fiancé's concern. I am not your fiancé. Marian's voice cut through clearly. She was standing on the store's porch, and even from a distance, Elias could see the fury in her rigid posture. I broke our engagement before I left Boston. You have no claim on me. You were distraught, Edward said, playing to the crowd. Confused, not thinking clearly. I forgave you for that. But now it's time to stop this charade and come home where you belong. Elias was moving before he consciously decided to crossing the street in long strides. He reached the crowd just as Marian descended the porch steps. My home is here, she said clearly, working honestly for honest wages, something you've never understood the value of actual work. Edward's face darkened. You're making a spectacle of yourself, acting like some common laborer when you're better than that. Your father would be ashamed. My father respects honest work, Marian shot back. Unlike you, who's never done a day's labor in your life. You leech off your father's money and other people's efforts while pretending to be important. Careful, Marian. Edward's voice dropped, turning ugly. You're embarrassing yourself. The only one embarrassed should be you, said Mrs. Henderson, pushing through the crowd. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, wife of the town's banker and the unofficial arbiter of social acceptability in Los Alamos. Harassing a young woman who's made her refusal clear, that's not the behavior of a gentleman. This is a private matter, Edward started. You made it public when you started spreading insinuations about Miss Cole's character, Mrs. Henderson said crisply. I've known Marian since she arrived. She's been nothing but respectable. She attends church, she does fine work, and she's certainly capable of deciding her own future without interference from a rejected suitor. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Edward's face flushed with anger and humiliation. This is absurd, he said. Marian, be reasonable. I believe the lady has made her position clear, Elias said, stepping to Marian's side. Multiple times. You need to accept it and move on. Edward's eyes narrowed. Of course you'd say that. You're the one benefiting from this situation, keeping Marian here for your own purposes. My purpose is having someone who can cook without burning the house down, Elias said evenly. If you're implying something else, say it plainly instead of hiding behind insinuations. The crowd had gone very quiet, sensing the confrontation escalating. Edward's hands clenched into fists. Fine, he said. I'm saying you've taken advantage of a vulnerable woman, isolated her from her family and friends, convinced her to stay in this backward place for your own convenience. That's a lie, Marian said sharply. Elias has done nothing but treat me with respect and fairness. You're the one who betrayed my trust, who lied and manipulated. You have no moral ground to stand on. I think you should leave town, Mr. Blackwell, said Marshal Davies, who'd been watching from the edge of the crowd. He was an older man, weathered and calm, who'd kept the peace in Los Alamos for nearly a decade. Seems to me you're disturbing that peace, and the lady's made her wishes abundantly clear. Are you threatening me, Marshal? Edward asked incredulously. I'm suggesting you take your business elsewhere, Davies said mildly, before your business becomes my business, if you understand my meaning. For a moment, Edward looked like he might push back. Then he seemed to calculate the odds, one man against a hostile crowd, and discretion won out. Very well, he said tightly. But this isn't over, Marion. Your father will hear about this, all of it. I'll write him myself, Marion said, and unlike your version, mine will actually be true. Edward turned on his heel and stalked toward the hotel, his borrowed dignity in tatters. The crowd began to disperse, several people stopping to pat Marion's shoulder or murmur words of support. Mrs. Henderson gave her a firm hug. You handled that beautifully, dear, she said. Don't let that man make you doubt yourself. You've found a good place here. After the crowd had scattered, Marion stood on the porch, visibly trembling. Elias moved closer, careful not to crowd her. You all right? I will be, she said. Once my heart stops racing. She looked up at him. Thank you for being there, always Elias said, and realized he meant it completely. That night back at the ranch, they all gathered for dinner with a sense of relief. Edward's public humiliation seemed to have diffused the immediate threat, and the town's support of Marion had been clear. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of Edward Blackwell. Men like that didn't slink away quietly when their pride was wounded. He was right to be worried. 2 days after the confrontation in town, the first wave of summer fever hit Los Alamos. It started with Danny, who came to breakfast looking pale and complaining of a headache. By noon, he was burning with fever and couldn't keep food down. Marion immediately moved him into a spare room in the main house, away from the other hands, and began nursing him with cool compresses and willow bark tea. It's going around, Thomas reported when he delivered supplies that afternoon. Doc Winters says half the town's got it. Usually passes in a few days, but it's nasty while it lasts. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. How bad can it get? Most folks recover fine, Thomas said, but his expression was troubled. But some get it worse. The very young, the very old people who are already weakened. Doc's been running himself ragged trying to keep up. Within 24 hours, Sam was sick too. Then Jake. The bunkhouse became a quarantine zone, and Marion transformed into a tireless nurse moving between patients with barely a pause for rest. She prepared broths that the sick men could keep down, changed sweat-soaked sheets, monitored fevers, and somehow still managed to keep the healthy members of the household fed. Elias watched her work with growing concern and admiration. She never complained, never hesitated, never showed fear, even though he knew she had to be exhausted. When he tried to help, she directed him efficiently, fetch more water, bring clean linens, ride to town for additional medicine. You should rest, he told her on the third day, finding her in the kitchen at midnight preparing another batch of fever-reducing tea. You're going to collapse. I'll rest when everyone's better, Marion said, though her face was drawn with fatigue. They need me. You're no good to them if you get sick too, Elias argued. I won't get sick. But even as she said it, she swayed slightly, catching herself on the counter. Marion, I'm fine, she insisted. Just tired. I'll be fine. She wasn't fine. The next morning, Elias woke to find Pete standing in his doorway, his face grave. Boss, you need to come quick. It's Miss Cole. Elias's heart stopped. He threw on clothes and ran to Marion's cottage, Pete close behind. Inside, he found her collapsed on the floor, her skin burning with fever, barely conscious. Marion, he said, dropping to his knees beside her. Can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. Elias, I'm sorry. I need to check on Danny. Danny's better, Elias said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. You need to worry about yourself right now. Can't be sick, Marion mumbled. Too much to do. Pete, ride for Doc Winters, Elias ordered. Fast as you can. Doc's been at the Henderson place all night, Pete said. Their youngest is real bad, but I'll bring him soon as he can come. After Pete left, Elias carefully lifted Marion and carried her to the main house, settling her in his own room, the largest with the most windows for air circulation. She was frighteningly light in his arms, burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. He spent the rest of that day and into the night doing everything he'd watched Marion do for the others. Cool compresses on her forehead and wrists, willow bark tea spooned carefully into her mouth when she was conscious enough to swallow. Freshwater clean sheets, constant vigilance. Doc Winters arrived near midnight looking as exhausted as Elias felt. He examined Marion thoroughly, his expression growing more serious. "She's got it bad," he said finally. "Worse than most. Her body's exhausted from nursing everyone else, which makes fighting the fever harder." He looked at Elias. "Next 24 hours are critical. Keep her cool, keep her hydrated. If the fever doesn't break by tomorrow night..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. After the doctor left, Elias pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in for the long watch. Outside, he could hear Pete and the recovering ranch hands managing what they could of the daily work, but all of that seemed distant and unimportant. Nothing mattered except the woman in the bed fighting a battle he couldn't help her win. "You can't leave," he told her, though she was too deep in fever dreams to hear him. "You hear me, Marion Cole? You came all this way, survived heartbreak, built something new. You don't get to leave now." The hours crawled past. Marion's fever spiked and dipped, spiked again. She thrashed in the grip of nightmares, crying out for people Elias didn't know. Her mother, her father, someone named Catherine. Once she called for Edward, which made Elias's jaw tighten with irrational jealousy, even as he smoothed her hair and murmured reassurances. "Not here," he told her. "Just me. Just Elias. You're safe." Somewhere around 3 in the morning during the darkest part of the night, when hope seemed thinnest, Marion's eyes opened. They were clearer than they'd been focused on his face. "Elias," she whispered, "you're still here." "Where else would I be?" he asked, reaching for the water cup. "Sleeping, running the ranch, living your life." She tried to smile. "Not babysitting a foolish woman who worked herself sick." "You're not foolish," Elias said firmly. "You're compassionate, brave, stubborn as hell, but not foolish." He helped her drink, supporting her head with his hand. "And I'm exactly where I want to be." "Why?" The question was barely audible. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was tangled and damp with sweat. Her face was pale except for the fever flush on her cheeks. She looked vulnerable and small and nothing like the capable, confident woman who'd walked into his smoke-filled kitchen 2 months ago. And he'd never seen anything more beautiful in his life. Because somewhere between burned eggs and now, he heard himself say, "You became important to me, more important than I realized until I thought I might lose you." Marion's eyes widened slightly. "Elias." "Rest," he said suddenly, terrified that he'd said too much, revealed too much. "We'll talk when you're better." "Promise." Her hand found his, her grip weak but deliberate. "Promise," he said, and held her hand as she drifted back to sleep. The fever broke just before dawn. Elias felt it happen, the subtle shift in her temperature, the change in her breathing from labored to more natural. He pressed his hand to her forehead and nearly wept with relief. Still warm, but no longer burning. The crisis had passed. He must have dozed off then, because the next thing he knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and Marion was watching him from the bed, her eyes clear and aware. "Good morning," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Good morning," Elias replied, sitting up with a wince. His back was protesting the night spent in a chair. "How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a horse," Marion admitted. "But alive. Thanks to you." "You did the hard part," Elias said. "I just kept you company." "You stayed with me all night." It wasn't a question. "I told you I would." Something shifted in her expression, something soft and wondering that made Elias's heart stutter. "You said something last night about me becoming important to you. Or did I dream that—" "You didn't dream it," Elias said, deciding that if he was going to be honest, he might as well commit to it fully. "I meant every word." Before Marion could respond, a commotion from outside interrupted them. Raised voices, the sound of horses, and then Pete's urgent call, "Boss, we got trouble." Elias was on his feet instantly. Instincts honed by years of ranch emergencies taking over. "Stay here," he told Marion. "Rest." "What's happening?" she asked, trying to sit up. "I don't know yet, but I'll handle it." He paused at the door. We're not done with this conversation." "I should hope not," Marion said, and despite her weakness, there was warmth in her voice that made him want to forget everything else and stay right there. But duty called and Elias went. Outside he found chaos. Edward Blackwell had returned, but this time he'd brought reinforcements, 2 men who looked like they might be lawyers or federal officials, plus Marshal Davies from town, and most surprisingly, Thomas Cole. "What's going on?" Elias demanded. Thomas looked miserable. "I'm sorry, Elias. He's claiming kidnapping. Says you're holding Marion against her will." "That's absurd," Elias said flatly. "She's free to leave anytime she wants." "Then let me see her," Edward demanded. "Let me speak to her without your influence, and we'll settle this right now." "She's sick," Elias said. "She's been nursing half the ranch through fever, and now she's got it herself. She's not seeing anyone." "Convenient," Edward sneered. "The moment I arrived to investigate, suddenly she's too ill to speak. How very fortunate for you." Marshal Davies looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Mercer, I know this seems irregular, but Mr. Blackwell has made serious accusations. I need to verify Miss Cole's well-being and hear from her directly about her situation." "She's recovering from a serious fever," Elias said through gritted teeth. "The doctor was here last night. She needs rest, not interrogation." "I'm not proposing interrogation," Davies said. "Just a brief conversation to establish the facts." "Let me," said a voice from the house, and everyone turned to see Marion standing in the doorway. She was wearing a robe over her nightgown, leaning heavily against the doorframe. Her face still pale, but her spine straight and her eyes blazing. "Let me tell you exactly what the facts are." "Marion, no," Elias started. "You shouldn't be out of bed." "I'm fine," she said, though she clearly wasn't. "And I'm tired of Edward Blackwell spreading lies about me and this ranch." She addressed the marshal directly. "You want to know if I'm being held against my will? I'm not. You want to know if Mr. Mercer has ever been anything but respectful and honorable toward me? He has. You want to know if I have any intention of going anywhere with Edward Blackwell? I absolutely do not. Are those facts clear enough for you, Marshal?" "Miss Cole, you're not well," Edward said, his voice dripping false concern. "You don't know what you're saying. That fever has obviously affected your judgment." "My judgment is perfectly clear," Marion said coldly. "Clearer than it's been in years. I see you for exactly what you are. Edward, a manipulative, controlling man who can't accept that a woman has the right to refuse him." "I'm trying to save you from a terrible mistake," Edward insisted. "Living here working as a common servant, throwing away your position in society." "I'm not throwing anything away," Marion interrupted. "I'm building something better, something real. And you have no place in it." She swayed slightly, and Elias moved immediately to her side, supporting her elbow. "See how he controls her," Edward said to the assembled group. "She can't even stand on her own without him." "He's supporting me because I'm recovering from fever, you idiot," Marion snapped. "Something I got while nursing sick men back to health. That's called being a decent human being, though I don't expect you to understand the concept." One of the men with Edward, the one who looked like a lawyer, cleared his throat. "Miss Cole, Mr. Blackwell has suggested that you may be under duress, that you may fear speaking freely in front of Mr. Mercer. If you'd like to speak privately." "I have nothing to say privately that I won't say publicly," Marion said. "I am not under duress. I am employed by Mr. Mercer as his cook, a position I accepted willingly and performed to the best of my ability. I live in a private cottage on the property. I am paid fair wages. I am treated with complete respect by everyone here, and I am exactly where I want to be." "Your father is concerned about you," Edward tried again. "He asked me to bring you home safely." "Then why didn't he write to me directly?" Marion challenged. "I've been writing to my mother weekly. If my father wanted me home, he could have said so. Instead, you've taken it upon yourself to harass me, spread lies about my employer, and now bring officials to intimidate me into compliance. Does that sound like concern or control?" Thomas stepped forward. "For what it's worth, Marshal, I can vouch for everything Marion said. She's been writing to her mother regularly. Her family knows exactly where she is and what she's doing. And I've visited this ranch multiple times. There's nothing improper happening here." Marshal Davies looked between all the parties involved, clearly trying to assess the situation. Finally, he addressed Edward. Mr. Blackwell, it seems clear to me that Miss Cole is here of her own free will and wishes to remain so. Unless you have specific evidence of wrongdoing, not speculation or innuendo, but actual evidence, I don't see grounds for further investigation. This is outrageous, Edward sputtered. She's clearly been manipulated. I've been manipulated by exactly one person, Marion cut in. And that person is you, Edward. You manipulated me into believing you loved me. You manipulated another woman into believing she'd be your mistress. And now you're trying to manipulate these officials into forcing me back under your control, but it's not going to work. I'm done being manipulated by you or anyone else. Your father will hear about this. Edward threatened, his composure finally cracking completely. About all of it. About you living in sin with this cowboy, about your complete abandonment of propriety, about how I found honest work and honest people after escaping a lying snake like you, Marion finished. Please do tell him. I'm sure he'll be fascinated to hear your version of events. And then he can read my version in the letters I've already sent. We'll see whose account he believes. Edward's face had gone red with rage. You're making a mistake, Marion, a huge mistake. And when you come crawling back to Boston begging for forgiveness, don't expect me to be waiting. I wouldn't dream of it, Marion said. In fact, I'm counting on you not being there, or here, or anywhere near me ever again. For a long moment, Edward just stared at her, and Elias could see the exact moment when he realized he'd lost. Not just this battle, but the entire war. Marion was never coming back to him, and all his machinations had only served to make that more certain. You'll regret this, Edward said finally, his voice low and bitter. The only thing I regret, Marion said, is ever believing you were worth my time. Edward turned and stalked toward his horse. The men he'd brought with him exchanged glances, then followed. Marshal Davies tipped his hat to Marion. I apologize for the disturbance, Miss Cole. I hope you feel better soon. Thank you, Marshal, Marion said, her voice already growing weaker. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was clearly fading. As the group rode away, Marion's knees buckled. Elias caught her before she could fall, sweeping her into his arms. I told you to stay in bed, he said, but there was no heat in it, only concern and something that might have been awe. Had to end it, Marion mumbled against his chest. Once and for all. You definitely did that, Thomas said, following them into the house. Remind me never to make you angry, niece. That was magnificent. Elias carried Marion back to bed, where she immediately closed her eyes. Tired now, she said. Did I really tell Edward off in my nightgown in front of half of Los Alamos? You did, Elias confirmed, pulling the blanket over her. It was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. Or stupidest, Marion said, but she was smiling slightly. Definitely brave, Elias insisted. Thomas cleared his throat from the doorway. I should head back to town, but Elias, can I have a word outside? Reluctantly, Elias left Marion to rest and joined Thomas on the porch. The older man looked serious. That man's not going to let this go quietly, Thomas said. He's humiliated now, which makes him dangerous. He'll look for ways to cause trouble. I know, Elias said. But what can he do? Marion's made her position clear to everyone, including legal authorities. He can write to her father, Thomas said. Twist the story, make it sound worse than it is. James Cole is a reasonable man, but he's also protective of his daughter. If Edward convinces him that Marion's in danger or being taken advantage of, then her father might demand she return home, Elias finished grimly. Or come out here himself to investigate. Exactly. Thomas sighed. I hate to say it, but Edward's smart enough to know that the one person Marion can't easily refuse is her own father. If James arrives convinced that his daughter's being exploited or has lost her way, it could be complicated. Elias's jaw tightened. What do you suggest? Write to James yourself, Thomas said. Give him your version of events before Edward can poison the well. Explain the situation honestly, that Marion's working here by choice, that she's valued and respected, that there's nothing improper happening. James is a fair man. If he hears the truth from someone credible, he's less likely to believe Edward's distortions. Will he believe me? Elias asked. A rancher he's never met claiming everything's fine. I'll co-sign the letter, Thomas offered. I'm family. My word will carry weight, and we can include testimonials from Mrs. Henderson and others in town who can vouch for Marion's situation. It was a good plan, but Elias felt a deep unease. The idea of putting Marion's future, her ability to choose her own path, into the hands of a man 2,000 miles away felt wrong. But what choice did they have? Like it or not, social conventions and family expectations still held power even in the territory. All right, Elias agreed. I'll write the letter today. After Thomas left, Elias returned to check on Marion. She was sleeping, her breathing steady, the fever flush finally fading from her cheeks. He stood in the doorway, watching her rest, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in his chest. She'd fought so hard to get here, to escape a man who saw her as property, to build a new life on her own terms, to find a place where she was valued for herself rather than her connections or her position. The idea that Edward could still reach her, still threaten the peace she'd found, made Elias want to ride after the man and settle things in a more permanent fashion. But that wouldn't help Marion. What would help was doing exactly what Thomas suggested, building a documented case for her well-being, creating a record that her father couldn't easily dismiss. That afternoon, while Marion slept and the ranch hands handled the essential work, Elias sat down to write one of the most important letters of his life. "Dear Mr. Cole," he began, then crossed it out. Too formal. He tried again. "Mr. James Cole, I am writing to you regarding your daughter, Marion." 3 hours and multiple drafts later, he had something he thought might work. He'd explained how Marion came to work at the ranch, described her duties and living arrangements, emphasized her skill and dedication, and directly addressed what he suspected Edward would claim. He was honest about the small-town gossip, but balanced it with Mrs. Henderson's and Thomas's endorsements. He finished by stating plainly that Marion was free to leave at any time, and that she'd made it clear she chose to stay. He signed it, sealed it, and gave it to Pete to deliver to Thomas, who would add his own letter and send both to Boston by the next post. It was done. Now all they could do was wait and see if it would be enough. That evening, Marion woke properly, for the first time since the confrontation. Elias brought her broth and bread, which she ate slowly while he caught her up on the ranch news. Danny and the others had fully recovered. The cattle were fine, everything was running smoothly. "And Edward?" she asked quietly. "Checked out of the hotel," Elias reported. "Pete heard he took the afternoon stage to Santa Fe, probably heading back to Boston." "Good," Marion said, but she looked troubled. "Though I'm sure he'll make trouble when he gets there." "We're prepared for that," Elias said, and explained about the letter. Marion was quiet for a long moment. "You wrote to my father with your uncle's help," Elias confirmed. "We wanted him to hear the truth before Edward could twist things. I hope that was all right." "It's more than all right," Marion said softly. "It's thoughtful, protective. Thank you." "You don't need to thank me for telling the truth," Elias said. "I'm not thanking you for telling the truth," Marion said, meeting his eyes. "I'm thanking you for caring enough to try to protect my future, my choices. Not many men would do that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the evening light casting long shadows across the room. Finally, Marion spoke again. "Before, when I was sick, you said something about me becoming important to you. Do you remember?" Elias's heart began to race. "I remember. Did you mean it? Or was that just fear talking, worried about losing your cook?" "I meant it," Elias said firmly. "And it has nothing to do with your cooking, though that's excellent. It's about you, who you are, the way you laugh at Danny's terrible jokes, the way you stand up for yourself, the way you're patient with Pete when he tells the same story for the 5th time, the way you transformed this place from just a ranch where I work into something that actually feels like a home." Marion's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Elias, I know the timing's terrible." He continued, the words tumbling out now that he'd started. "You just escaped one man trying to control your life. The last thing you need is another man complicating things. But I need you to know I would never ask you to be anything but yourself. Whatever you want, whatever you choose, I'll support it, even if that means watching you leave." "Leave?" Marion repeated. "Why would I leave?" "Your father might ask you to come home, or you might decide you want more than ranch life can offer, or—" "Elias," Marion interrupted gently. Stop inventing reasons for me to leave. I'm not going anywhere. This is where I want to be. This work, this place. She paused, then added quietly. These people, you're why I want to stay. The air between them seemed to thicken with possibility. Elias found himself leaning forward, slightly drawn to her like gravity. Are you sure? He asked. You've been through so much. I don't want to pressure you or... You're not pressuring me, Marion said. You're giving me a choice, a real choice. And I choose this. I choose here. I choose, She took a breath. I choose you. If you'll have me. If I'll have you. Elias laughed a sound of pure relief and joy. Marion, I'd be honored, terrified, but honored. Why terrified? She asked, smiling now. Because you matter, Elias said simply. Because losing you would hurt in ways I'm not sure I could recover from. Because I'm falling in love with you, and that's the most terrifying thing I've ever admitted out loud. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, tracking down Marion's cheeks. You can't say things like that when I'm still recovering from fever. It's not fair. I'm too weak to properly respond. Then respond when you're stronger, Elias said, reaching out to gently wipe away her tears. I'm not going anywhere. Take all the time you need. I don't need time, Marion said, catching his hand and holding it against her cheek. I already know what I feel. I've known for weeks probably. I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself, much less to you. But I love you, Elias Mercer. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you look at me like I'm capable of anything. I love that you burn eggs and can't make coffee without setting off smoke alarms. I love this ranch and this life and the future we could build together. Elias felt something in his chest expand like a door opening onto possibilities he'd stopped letting himself imagine. When you're better, he said, his voice rough with emotion, when you're completely recovered, I'd like to court you properly, if that's something you'd want. I'd want that very much, Marion said. Though I should warn you, I've already been courted by Edward. The bar is set pretty low. Elias laughed. I'll try to exceed those minimal expectations. I think you already have, Marion said softly. They sat together as twilight deepened, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing about their hopes for the future, about the ranch, about what came next. And though challenges still loomed on the horizon, though Edward's threat to contact Marion's father still hung over them in that moment, everything felt right. Everything felt like coming home. Marion's recovery took another week, during which Elias found himself inventing increasingly transparent excuses to check on her. He brought her books from his small collection wildflowers he'd picked during morning rides, and reports on ranch activities that she clearly didn't need but listened to anyway, with patient amusement. The ranch hands noticed, of course, and their knowing grins made Elias feel like a schoolboy, but he couldn't bring himself to care. The evening she finally felt strong enough to return to work, Elias found her in the kitchen, surveying her domain with the critical eye of a general returning to command. She'd insisted on making dinner despite his protests, and the familiar smells of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the house once again. You're supposed to be taking it easy, Elias said from the doorway. I've been taking it easy for a week, Marion replied without turning around. Any easier and I'll forget how to cook entirely. Besides, the men deserve a proper meal. Pete told me you've been attempting to feed them. We survived, Elias said defensively. Survival and satisfaction are different things. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes twinkling. Though I appreciate the effort, Pete said your beans were only slightly burned this time. Progress, Elias said, moving into the kitchen. He wanted to touch her, to pull her close, but they'd agreed to keep their changing relationship private until they understood what it meant themselves. No need to set tongues wagging before they were ready. Can I help with anything? You can sit down and stay out of my way, Marion said, but her tone was affectionate. Unless you've suddenly developed culinary skills in the past week, not even slightly. Then sit. Tell me what's been happening. Real news, not the sanitized version you've been feeding me. Elias settled into a chair, watching her move through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. The cattle are good. We've finished the south fence repairs. Jake and Sam are back to full strength. Danny's still a little weak, but improving. And Edward? Marion asked quietly. No word, no sightings. Thomas says he definitely left Santa Fe, probably heading back east. Elias hesitated. Though we haven't heard anything from Boston either. It's only been 2 weeks, Marion said. Mail takes time. My father's probably still reading Edward's version of events. She sighed. I should write to him myself, explain things from my perspective before he forms conclusions based on Edward's lies. I think that's wise, Elias agreed. Though, for what it's worth, Thomas and I made sure our letters were thorough. Your father will have the facts. He'll also have Edward whispering poison in his ear, Marion said. My father's protective. If Edward convinces him I'm being taken advantage of or that I've lost my mind or any of a dozen other scenarios he could paint, she trailed off, stirring something on the stove with more force than necessary. Then we'll deal with it, Elias said firmly. Together. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Marion set down her spoon and turned to face him fully. You say that now, but my father can be intense, commanding. He built his business from nothing, and he's used to getting his way. If he decides I need to come home, he won't accept no easily. Good thing you're his daughter, Elias said. Sounds like stubbornness runs in the family. That earned him a small smile. You haven't met him. He makes me look flexible. Then I look forward to the introduction, Elias said, because anyone who raised you can't be all that terrible. Intimidating, maybe, but not terrible. Before Marion could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the window, Elias could see Pete riding in with someone he didn't recognize. A well-dressed man on a fine horse carrying himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Expecting anyone? Marion asked, moving to look out the window. The moment she saw the rider, her face went pale. Oh no. What? Who is it? That's my father, Marion whispered. That's James Cole. Elias felt his stomach drop. Already. The letters couldn't have reached Boston and brought him back this fast. He must have already been on his way, Marion said, gripping the counter for support. Edward must have sent a telegram from Santa Fe. That's the only way Father could be here so quickly. She looked at Elias with genuine fear in her eyes. He's furious. I can tell by the way he's sitting. He only gets that rigid when he's absolutely livid. Stay here, Elias said, standing. Let me talk to him first. No, Marion said firmly. This is my fight. I won't hide behind you. It's not hiding, it's strategy. It's my father, Marion interrupted, and I need to face him. We'll do it together, remember? That's what you said. Elias wanted to argue, wanted to shield her from whatever confrontation was coming, but he recognized the determination in her expression. This was important to her. Standing her ground, facing her father as an equal rather than a wayward child who needed defending. Together, he agreed, and they walked out to meet James Cole. The man who dismounted in Elias's yard was in his mid-50s, with silver-shot dark hair and Marion's intelligent eyes. He was shorter than Elias had expected, perhaps 5'9", but he radiated authority in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. His traveling clothes were expensive but practical, and there was dust on his boots that suggested he'd been riding hard. Marion, he said, his voice carefully controlled. I'm glad to see you're well. When I received Edward's telegram claiming you were gravely ill and possibly being held captive, I feared the worst. Edward lied, Marion said evenly. I was ill with the same summer fever that half the territory caught, but I'm recovered now, and I've never been held captive. I'm here by choice. James turned his attention to Elias, assessing him with the shrewd gaze of a businessman evaluating a contract. You must be Elias Mercer. I received your letter and Thomas's. Very thorough, very reassuring. Under other circumstances, I might have been convinced to simply write back rather than traveling 2,000 miles. But Edward's telegram changed that, Elias said. Edward's telegram made alarming claims, James confirmed. That my daughter was living in improper conditions, had been manipulated into refusing him, was possibly being exploited. He suggested I needed to intervene immediately before the situation became more compromised. He looked back at Marion. I want to hear your version of events, truthfully, without anyone influencing your words. Father, this is my employer, Marion said, gesturing to Elias. He's not influencing anything. But if it would make you more comfortable, we can speak privately in my cottage. James nodded. I think that would be best. Elias watched them walk toward Marion's cottage, feeling utterly helpless. Pete appeared at his elbow, looking worried. That's her pa. That's him, Elias confirmed. Think he's going to take her back to Boston? I don't know, Elias admitted. But I'm not going to let her go without a fight. She got a say in it, Pete asked. She'd better, Elias said grimly. Because if he tries to force her, he'll find out just how protective this ranch can be. An hour crawled by with excruciating slowness. Elias tried to busy himself with evening chores, but his attention kept drifting to that cottage, wondering what was being said, whether Marion was holding her ground or being worn down by paternal pressure. Finally, the cottage door opened and both Marion and her father emerged. James's expression was unreadable as they approached the main house. Marion looked tired but resolute. Her chin raised in that way Elias had learned meant she'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. Mr. Mercer, James said formally. Might we speak privately? There are matters I need to discuss with you. Of course, Elias said, trying to read Marion's face for clues. She gave him a small nod, reassurance or warning, he couldn't tell. They went into Elias's office, a small room off the main house where he kept ranch records and conducted business. James settled into a chair with the ease of someone comfortable in any setting, while Elias remained standing too nervous to sit. My daughter has told me a great deal, James began. About Edward's betrayal, about her decision to come west, about her work here and her treatment by you and your men. She's also told me about Edward's harassment, his attempts to discredit you and this ranch, and his claims that she's being manipulated. All of which are false, Elias said firmly. Marion is free to leave any time. She chooses to stay. So she's explained, James said, at length, with considerable passion. He studied Elias carefully. She also explained that the two of you have developed feelings for each other, that you've declared your intentions to court her properly with respect for her autonomy and choices. Elias felt heat creep up his neck. He hadn't expected Marion to be quite that forthcoming with her father, but he supposed honesty was better than letting James discover it later. That's true. I love your daughter, Mr. Cole. I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. And what are your intentions? James asked bluntly. Beyond courting, what do you ultimately want from my daughter? I want to marry her, Elias said, deciding that complete honesty was the only viable strategy. If she'll have me, I want to build a life with her here on this ranch. I want to wake up every morning knowing she's chosen to be here, not because she has nowhere else to go, but because this is where she wants to be. With me. James was quiet for a long moment. You understand that Marion comes from a wealthy family. She could have a very comfortable life in Boston with social connections, security, all the advantages of city living. Here she'd be a rancher's wife in a remote territory. Hard work, isolation, uncertainty. Why would you ask her to give up so much? I wouldn't, Elias said. I'd never ask her to give up anything. If Marion decided tomorrow that she missed Boston, that she wanted to return to that life, I'd let her go. It would destroy me, but I'd let her go because her happiness matters more than my wants. He met James's eyes directly. But I don't think she wants that life anymore. I think she's found something here that she couldn't find in Boston, the freedom to be herself, to be valued for her work and her character, rather than her connections or her position. I can't offer her wealth or high society, but I can offer her respect, partnership, and a love that doesn't come with conditions or expectations. Pretty speech, James said, but there was something in his expression that might have been approval. Marion said you were a good man, direct, honest, unexpectedly romantic for a cowboy. She wasn't wrong. Does that mean you approve? Elias asked cautiously. It means I'm considering it, James said. My daughter is 25 years old, intelligent, and perfectly capable of making her own decisions. If she tells me she wants to stay here to build a life in the territory to marry a rancher she's known for barely 2 months, then that's her choice to make. He leaned forward slightly. But I'm her father. It's my job to ensure she's making that choice for the right reasons, not running from heartbreak, not settling because she's afraid to return home, not being swept up in romance without considering practical realities. How do I convince you this is real? Elias asked. You don't convince me, James said. Marion does, by showing me she's happy, fulfilled, making this choice with clear eyes and full understanding of what it means. He stood extending his hand. I'll be staying in Los Alamos for the next week, at the hotel. I want to see my daughter in her daily life, meet the people she's working with, understand this place that's become so important to her. At the end of that week, we'll talk again, and then I'll make my decision about whether to support this or try to convince her to return home. Elias shook his hand, recognizing the compromise for what it was. That's fair. More than fair. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, James said. I haven't decided anything, and if I determine that my daughter's well-being would be better served in Boston, I will do everything in my considerable power to persuade her to return. Make no mistake about that. I understand, Elias said, but I have faith in Marion. She knows her own mind. Yes, James agreed, a hint of pride entering his voice. She always has. Stubborn girl. Gets it from me, her mother says. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Mercer. Edward Blackwell is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. When I left Boston, he was making plans to return west, claiming unfinished business. I don't know what he's plotting, but I'd advise caution. Edward's not welcome here, Elias said firmly. That may not stop him, James warned. He's vindictive and he doesn't like losing what he considers his property. Watch your back, and watch Marion's. After James left for town, Elias found Marion waiting in the kitchen. She'd finished preparing dinner and the ranch hands were starting to gather, but she pulled Elias aside before they could sit down. What did he say? She asked urgently. That he wants to observe for a week before making any decisions, Elias reported. That he needs to see you're truly happy and making informed choices. That's actually better than I expected, Marion admitted. I thought he might try to drag me back to Boston immediately. You told him about us, Elias said. About our feelings. I had to, Marion said. He needed to understand that I'm not just running from Edward. I'm running toward something, toward someone, toward a future I want. She touched his arm gently. Was that all right? I know we said we'd keep things private, but lying to my father seemed worse. It's more than all right, Elias assured her. Though I'll admit having that conversation with him was terrifying. Welcome to my world, Marion said with a slight smile. James Cole is not a man to be trifled with. I noticed, Elias said dryly. He also warned me that Edward might be planning to come back. Marion's smile faded. Of course he is. Edward never could accept being told no. She sighed. Well, if he does return, he'll find I'm even less interested in his nonsense than before. And this time I have my father here to witness what a snake he really is. The next week was perhaps the strangest of Elias's life. James Cole visited the ranch daily, observing everything with those shrewd eyes, how Marion worked, how she interacted with the ranch hands, how she and Elias moved around each other with the careful awareness of people trying not to reveal too much too soon. He asked questions, lots of them, about ranch operations, about life in the territory, about Elias's plans for the future. To Elias's surprise, he found himself genuinely liking James Cole. The man was direct and intelligent, with a dry wit that reminded him of Marion. He didn't condescend or judge, just observed and calculated, always thinking several moves ahead. On the third day, James asked to ride out with Elias to check the north pasture. As they rode, James spoke thoughtfully. I was poor once, you know. Younger than you are now. Worked in a factory in Boston, saved every penny, took risks that terrified my young wife. Catherine thought I was insane investing in a failing textile business. But I saw potential where others saw only problems. Marion mentioned you built your business from nothing, Elias said. From less than nothing, James corrected. From debt and determination. It took 15 years before we were truly comfortable. Another 10 before we were wealthy. Catherine stood by me through all of it, the lean years, the setbacks. The times I was sure we'd lose everything. He glanced at Elias. Do you know why I'm telling you this? To let me know you understand taking risks, Elias guessed. To let you know I understand what real partnership looks like, James said. Catherine and I built our life together. She had as much say in major decisions as I did, which was unusual for the time. Still is in many circles, but I learned early that her judgment was as good as mine, often better. Respecting her made me a better businessman and a better man. You're saying Marion deserves the same, Elias said. I'm saying if you marry my daughter, she'd better have equal partnership in all decisions, James said firmly. Not because it's modern or progressive, but because it's right. And because Marion's brilliant, and any man who doesn't recognize that is a fool. I do recognize it, Elias said. That's part of why I love her. She's smarter than I am about most things. Definitely better at planning and organization. I'd be an idiot not to value her input. Good answer, James said. Edward never understood that about her. He saw her intelligence as something to be managed, controlled, channeled in directions he approved of. It's why their engagement was doomed from the start, even without his betrayal. They rode in silence for a while, checking fence lines and watching cattle graze. Finally, James spoke again. Can you provide for her honestly? Can this ranch support a family? It can, Elias said. The ranch is profitable. Not wealthy, but secure. We've got good water rights, strong grazing land, reliable markets for our cattle. I've been building this operation for 10 years and it's on solid ground. Marion would never want for necessities. Luxuries might be fewer than she's used to. She told me she doesn't care about luxuries, James said. That she's happier here doing honest work than she ever was in Boston, attending parties and managing social obligations. Do you believe her? I do, Elias said without hesitation. I've watched her. She lights up when she's cooking, when she's organizing supplies, when she's solving practical problems. She's found purpose here. That's worth more than any luxury. James nodded slowly. I think you might be right. On the 5th day, James asked to speak with Marion's friends in town. Mrs. Henderson, Thomas, Doc Winters, Marshall Davies. Elias heard later that James had interviewed each of them thoroughly, asking pointed questions about Marion's well-being, her happiness, whether they'd seen any signs of coercion or undue influence. Apparently, Mrs. Henderson had given him quite an earful about Edward's behavior and Marion's grace under pressure. That evening, James invited both Elias and Marion to dinner at the Los Alamos Hotel. It was a small establishment, nothing fancy, but the proprietor had set up a private corner table for them. The meal was awkward at first, with all three of them too aware that this felt like some kind of test or judgment. Finally, James set down his fork and looked at his daughter. Marion, I need you to answer something honestly. If I asked you to return to Boston with me, not demanded, but asked, would you consider it? Marion met her father's gaze steadily. No, Father, I wouldn't. I'd appreciate the offer, but I'd decline. My life is here now. Even if Edward publicly apologizes, even if I could secure you better marriage prospects in Boston, even if I sweetened the offer with whatever incentives you wanted. Even then, Marion said firmly, this isn't about running away anymore. It's about running toward something better. I found work, I love people I care about, and a man who treats me like an equal partner. Why would I give that up for a world where I'd always be decorative but never essential? James turned to Elias. And you? If circumstances required you to leave this ranch, if there was an opportunity that would be better for Marion but meant giving up this place, would you consider it? It was a trap, Elias realized. Say yes, and he'd be admitting the ranch wasn't essential. Say no, and he'd seem inflexible. He chose honesty. I love this ranch. It's my life's work. But if Marion needed something I couldn't provide here, if her happiness or well-being required going somewhere else, then yes. I'd consider it. I'd probably fight it first, try to find alternatives, but ultimately her happiness matters more than my attachment to land and cattle. Even if it meant returning to Boston, James pressed. I'd hate it, Elias admitted. Cities and I don't get along, but if that's what Marion needed, I'd do it. Love means being willing to sacrifice. I'm willing. James leaned back in his chair, a smile finally breaking through his serious expression. Good, very good. Because I'd have been disappointed if either of you had given me easy answers. Life is complicated. Love is complicated. Anyone who pretends otherwise is either lying or hasn't thought things through. Father, Marion said slowly, hope dawning in her voice. Are you saying? I'm saying I've seen enough, James said. You're happy here. Genuinely happy. And Mr. Mercer here treats you with the respect and partnership I'd want for any daughter of mine. I won't pretend I understand choosing ranch life over Boston society, but I don't have to understand it. I just have to accept that it's your choice to make." He looked at Elias. "You have my blessing to court my daughter, and if in time you decide to marry, you'll have my support in that as well." Marion's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Father. You have no idea what that means to me." "I have some idea," James said gruffly. "You're my daughter. Your happiness matters more than my preferences or plans. I just needed to be sure this was real, that you weren't just rebounding from Edward's betrayal or running from painful memories." "I'm running toward a future," Marion said, reaching across the table to grip her father's hand. "One I chose, one I want." "Then that's good enough for me," James said. He signaled for more wine. "Now, let's toast to new beginnings. And then you can tell me all about your plans for this ranch. Because knowing my daughter, she's already got ideas for improvements and expansions." Marion laughed, the sound bright with relief and joy. "I may have made a few notes about the supply system, and possibly reorganized the entire storage shed, and suggested some new recipes that could reduce food costs while improving nutrition." "That's my girl," James said proudly. "Always optimizing. Mr. Mercer." "I hope you know what you're getting into." "I'm beginning to," Elias said, grinning at Marion. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." They talked late into the evening, the tension finally broken, the future suddenly feeling more certain. James shared stories of Marion's childhood, her determination, her stubbornness, her fierce intelligence that had sometimes frustrated teachers who expected girls to be docile. Marion countered with stories of her father's business gambles, his legendary negotiations, his soft heart hidden beneath gruff efficiency. When they finally left the hotel, James pulled Elias aside one more time. "Take care of her. Not because she needs taking care of, she's perfectly capable of handling herself, but because everyone deserves someone who has their back. Be that person for her." "I will," Elias promised. "Every day for the rest of my life if she'll let me." "Oh, she'll let you," James said with a knowing smile. "The way she looks at you. That's how Catherine looked at me 40 years ago. Like I was worth taking a chance on. Like together we could face anything." He clapped Elias on the shoulder. "Don't waste it. Don't take it for granted. And don't ever make her feel like she's less important than cattle or land or pride." "I won't," Elias said. As they rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Marion was quiet, processing everything. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you for winning over my father. I know he can be intimidating." "He wasn't so bad," Elias said. "Intense, yes, but fair. And clearly devoted to you." "I'm lucky," Marion said softly, "to have a father who respects my choices even when he doesn't understand them, and to have found someone who makes those choices worth defending." "I'm the lucky one," Elias countered. "You walked into my smoke-filled kitchen and changed everything. My life, my future, my understanding of what happiness could look like." "That was a terrible kitchen," Marion said, smiling. "The worst I'd ever seen. And you fixed it," Elias said, "just like you've fixed everything else around here. Made it better, made it home." They reached the ranch, and as Elias helped Marion down from her horse, their hands lingered together. The future stretched before them, uncertain in details but clear in direction. Whatever challenges came, and they both knew more would come because life always brought challenges, they'd face them together. And that they both realized was worth more than any certainty. James Cole stayed in Los Alamos for 3 more days after giving his blessing. And in that time, something remarkable happened. The tension that had been coiled tight around the ranch for weeks finally released, and life settled into a rhythm that felt almost magical in its normalcy. Marion worked in the kitchen with renewed energy, her laughter ringing through the house. Elias caught himself smiling at odd moments for no reason other than pure contentment. Even the ranch hands noticed the shift, commenting that the place felt lighter, somehow more like a real home than just a workplace. On James's last evening, before returning to Boston, he requested one final dinner at the ranch. Marion outdid herself, preparing a feast that had the ranch hands practically weeping with gratitude: roasted chicken with herbs, potatoes and cream sauce, fresh vegetables, and an apple pie that smelled like heaven itself. They all gathered around the large kitchen table, which had been extended with planks to accommodate everyone. "I have to say," James remarked, sampling the chicken, I understand now why Mr. Mercer was so desperate to keep you employed, Marion. This is extraordinary. Wait until you try the pie, Danny said enthusiastically. Miss Cole makes the best pie in the entire territory. Maybe the entire country. That's a bold claim, young man, James said, but he was smiling. It's a true claim, Pete confirmed. I've been eating pie for 47 years and I've never tasted better. Marion blushed at the praise, but Elias could see the pleasure in her eyes. This was what she'd been missing in Boston, the simple satisfaction of doing work that mattered, of being valued for her skills rather than her social connections. Here she wasn't just James Cole's daughter or some man's prospective wife. She was Marion, the brilliant cook who could transform basic ingredients into something extraordinary, who could organize chaos into order, who could make a house feel like a home. After dinner, as the ranch hands drifted back to the bunkhouse and Marion cleared dishes, James pulled Elias aside for one last private conversation. They stood on the porch, watching the sun paint the Jemez Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Mercer, James said. When I boarded that train in Boston, I was fully prepared to drag my daughter home by force if necessary. Edward's telegram had me convinced she was in real danger, being taken advantage of by unscrupulous people. And now, Elias asked. Now I'm ashamed I believed him even for a moment, James admitted. I should have known my daughter better than that. Should have trusted her judgment. Edward played on my fears, every father's fear that his daughter will be hurt or exploited. He's manipulative, I'll give him that. He's also persistent, Elias said. You warned me he might come back. James nodded grimly. He will. Men like Edward don't accept defeat gracefully. He sees Marion as a possession he lost, and he'll want to reclaim her not because he loves her, but because his pride demands it. You need to be prepared for that. What would you suggest? Documentation, James said immediately. Letters from Marion stating her choices clearly, testimonials from townspeople, legal documents if necessary. Make it impossible for Edward to claim she's being coerced or is unfit to make decisions. And, he hesitated, consider marrying sooner rather than later. A husband has legal standing to protect his wife in ways an employer cannot. I don't want to rush Marion, Elias said. She just escaped one man who was trying to control her timeline. I'm not suggesting you control anything, James clarified. I'm suggesting you have an honest conversation about practical realities. Love is important, but so is legal protection, especially for a woman in her position. It was pragmatic advice, and Elias recognized the wisdom in it. I'll talk to her. Good, James extended his hand. Take care of my daughter, Mr. Mercer. And when you're ready, when you've made it official, write to us. Catherine will want to know everything. She'll probably want to see this place for herself. You're both welcome any time, Elias said, shaking his hand firmly. You're family now. Not quite yet, James said with a slight smile. But soon, I think. Very soon. The next morning, they all gathered to see James off. He hugged Marion tightly, whispering something in her ear that made her eyes fill with tears. Then he shook hands with Elias, clapped Pete and the other ranch hands on the shoulders, and climbed into the wagon that would take him to Los Alamos to catch the Santa Fe stage. Write often, he called to Marion. Your mother will worry if she doesn't hear from you regularly. I will, Father, Marion promised. Give her my love. They watched until the wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust, and then Marion turned to Elias with a smile that was equal parts relief and sadness. Well, that went better than I expected. Your father's a good man, Elias said. He is, Marion agreed. Strict, demanding, occasionally overbearing, but fundamentally good. I'm lucky to have him. She glanced at the ranch house. I suppose I should start preparing lunch. The men will be hungry soon. Marion, wait, Elias said. Can we talk first? Privately? Something in his tone made her study his face carefully. Of course. The cottage. They walked to her cottage in comfortable silence, though Elias's mind was racing. James's words about legal protection and practical realities kept echoing in his head, mixing with his own desires and fears. Inside the cottage, Marion settled into her favorite chair by the window, and Elias remained standing, too nervous to sit. What's wrong? Marion asked. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. I'm about to say something that might be too soon, Elias admitted. but I need to say it anyway because waiting seems more dangerous than speaking. All right, Marian said carefully. I'm listening. Elias took a deep breath. Your father warned me that Edward will likely return, that he's the type to hold grudges and seek revenge, and he suggested that we should consider, that is, he thought it might be wise to. He was botching this completely. Marian, will you marry me? The words tumbled out in a rush, completely graceless. Marian's eyes widened in surprise. That wasn't how I planned to ask, Elias continued quickly. I was going to wait court you properly for months, make it romantic and special. But your father made me realize that waiting might not be wise. Edward's still a threat, and as your employer, I have limited legal ability to protect you. As your husband, I'd have more standing, more ability to keep him away from you. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This is coming out all wrong. I'm not asking you to marry me just for protection. I'm asking because I love you, because I want to spend my life with you, because the thought of waking up every morning and knowing you chose me is the best thing I can imagine. The protection part is just practical justification for what I already want. Marian was very still, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched out until Elias felt like he might explode from anxiety. That was possibly the least romantic proposal in history, she finally said. Elias's heart sank. I know, I'm sorry, I should have, but it was also the most honest. Marian continued, a smile beginning to form. No flowery speeches, no practiced lines, just the truth, messy and awkward and completely sincere. She stood and crossed to him. Elias Mercer, you're absolutely right that this is too soon. We've known each other for barely 3 months. By all reasonable standards, we should wait at least a year before considering marriage. But, Elias asked hopefully, but nothing about our situation has been reasonable from the start, Marian said. I fell in love with you somewhere between burned eggs and summer fever. I chose this life, this place, you with more certainty than I've ever felt about anything. So yes, I'll marry you. Not because it's practical or protective, but because I want to. Because when you asked, just now clumsy and nervous and completely sincere, my heart said yes before my brain could overthink it. Elias felt like he might actually float off the ground from sheer joy. You mean it? You'll actually marry me? I mean it, Marian confirmed, though I have conditions. Anything, Elias promised. First, equal partnership in all ranch decisions. My father was right. I'm good at planning and organization, and I want my input valued. Done, Elias said immediately. I'd be a fool not to value your input. What else? Second, I want to keep working, not just cooking, but helping with the business side. Bookkeeping, supply management, correspondence. I'm good at those things, and I don't want to be relegated to only domestic duties. I'd love your help with that, Elias said honestly. The bookkeeping's been giving me headaches for years. Third, Marian said, when we have children, if we have children, I want them raised with the understanding that boys and girls are equally capable. No nonsense about women's work and men's work, just work that needs doing and people who can do it. Agreed, Elias said. Anything else? Just one more thing, Marian said, her expression softening. Promise me you'll never stop being yourself. Never try to be someone you're not, or change who you are to please me or anyone else. The man I fell in love with is honest, hardworking, occasionally stubborn, and burns eggs with impressive consistency. I want to marry that man, not some polished version you think I deserve. That's the easiest promise I'll ever make, Elias said, pulling her into his arms, because I'm not capable of being anything else. They stood together for a long moment, holding each other, letting the reality of their decision sink in. Then Elias remembered something important and pulled back slightly. I don't have a ring, he said. A proper proposal should have a ring. Then we'll get one, Marian said practically. Or make one. Or not have one at all. Elias, I don't need jewelry to know you love me. I see it in the way you look at me, the way you respect my choices, the way you stood up to Edward and supported me through everything. That's worth more than any ring. You're getting a ring anyway, Elias said firmly. You deserve all the traditional things: engagement ring, proper wedding celebration with friends and family. Just because circumstances are unusual doesn't mean you should miss out on the important parts. All right, Marian agreed, smiling. Then let's do it properly. Let's plan a wedding that means something. Over the next week, they shared their news with the ranch and the town. Pete's response was to whoop loudly and declare a celebration was in order. Danny looked heartbroken for approximately 30 seconds before congratulating them sincerely. Mrs. Henderson immediately began planning, insisting that the wedding must be held at the Los Alamos church with proper reception afterward. Thomas beamed with pride and offered to give Marion away since her father had returned to Boston. Elias rode to Santa Fe and purchased a ring, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. Nothing ostentatious, but clearly made with care and quality. When he presented it to Marion that evening, slipping it onto her finger on the porch of her cottage, she cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that came from overwhelming happiness, from having something precious you'd stopped believing you'd ever find. They set the date for 6 weeks out, giving them time to prepare and for word to reach Marion's parents. Elias wrote to James and Catherine, formally requesting their blessing and inviting them to attend if they could make the journey. Marion wrote as well a long letter describing her happiness and her certainty about this choice. The weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Marion worked on her dress with help from Mrs. Henderson and several other women from town. Elias cleaned up the main ranch house, making repairs and improvements he'd been putting off for years. The ranch hands pitched in enthusiastically, painting, fixing, and generally making everything look its best for the celebration to come. 3 weeks before the wedding, they received a telegram from Boston. James and Catherine Cole would be attending along with Marion's younger brother William, whom she hadn't seen in over a year. The news sent Marion into a frenzy of happy planning, wanting everything to be perfect for her family's arrival. 2 weeks before the wedding, Edward Blackwell returned. It was Danny who spotted him first, riding up the south road with 2 rough-looking men flanking him. The young ranch hand immediately alerted Pete, who sent him running for Elias while he positioned himself strategically in the yard. Elias was in the barn when he got word, and his first instinct was to reach for his rifle. But Marion appeared at his elbow before he could. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't give him the satisfaction of making you violent. Let's handle this with words first." "And if words don't work?" Elias asked. "Then we call Marshal Davies," Marion said. "But let's not assume the worst immediately." They walked out together to meet Edward and his companions. Up close, Edward looked worse than Elias remembered, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and a bitter set to his mouth. The men with him were clearly hired muscle rough types who looked more comfortable with fists than conversation. "Marion," Edward said, his voice tight with forced civility, "I heard congratulations are in order. Engaged to your employer. How convenient." "Edward B.," Marion said coolly. "I thought we'd settled matters between us. What are you doing here?" "I came to give you one last chance," Edward said. "One final opportunity to come to your senses before you make a catastrophic mistake." "Marrying Elias isn't a mistake," Marion said firmly. "It's the best decision I've ever made." "You don't know what you're saying," Edward insisted. "You're still hurt from our misunderstanding, still confused. But I'm willing to overlook all of it. Your flight to the territory, your employment here, even your association with this man. Come back to Boston with me now, and we can start fresh. I'll even forgive the engagement." "There's nothing to forgive," Marion said, "and no misunderstanding. You betrayed me with another woman while we were engaged. That wasn't confusion, it was clarity. I saw exactly who you are and I chose to leave. That choice stands." Edward's facade of civility began to crack. "You're throwing away your entire future, your position in society, your family's reputation, everything you've ever known. For what? To be a rancher's wife in the middle of nowhere. To be my own person," Marion corrected. "To do work that matters. To be with a man who respects me. Those things are worth infinitely more than Boston society." "Your father will cut you off," Edward threatened. "He'll disinherit you for this embarrassment." "My father gave us his blessing," Marion said calmly. "He was here 2 weeks ago. Met Elias, saw the ranch, understood exactly what I was choosing. He supports my decision completely, so that threat is empty, Edward, just like all your other manipulations." Edward's face flushed with anger. "That's impossible. James Cole would never approve of his daughter marrying some uneducated cowboy." "James Cole," Elias said evenly, speaking for the first time, "approved of his daughter marrying a man who treats her as an equal partner, unlike you who sees women as property to be managed. Now I suggest you leave. You're not welcome here." "I'm not leaving without answers," Edward snapped. "What did you do to her? What lies did you tell to turn her against me?" "I didn't have to do anything," Elias said. "You did all the work yourself when you betrayed her. All I did was offer her honest work and honest respect. Apparently that was enough." One of Edward's hired men shifted forward slightly, and Pete immediately moved to intercept his hand resting casually near his gun belt. The other ranch hands had emerged from various locations, forming a loose semicircle around the confrontation. They weren't threatening, but their message was clear. The ranch protected its own. Edward looked around, seeming to finally recognize that he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. His expression twisted into something ugly. "You think you've won," he said to Marion. "You think choosing poverty and isolation over a respectable life makes you brave, but you'll regret this. When winter comes and this place is buried in snow, when you're stuck here with no society, no culture, no future, you'll remember what you gave up. And you'll realize I was right all along. The only regret I have," Marion said, her voice cold as steel, "is that I wasted a year of my life believing you were worth my time. Now get off this property before I ask Marshal Davies to remove you for trespassing." "This isn't over," Edward said. "Yes," Marion said firmly. "It is. It's been over since the day I discovered your betrayal. The only person who can accept that is you. Now leave Edward. Move on with your life. Find someone else to manipulate, because I am done with you. Forever." Edward stared at her for a long moment, and Elias could see the exact instant when he finally understood that he'd truly lost. All the manipulation, all the threats, all the attempts to control, none of it had worked. Marion was beyond his reach, and nothing he said or did would change that. "You'll be sorry," Edward said finally, but the words had no force behind them, just the weak threat of a defeated man. "No," Marion said simply. "I really won't." Edward wheeled his horse around with jerky movements and spurred it toward the road, his hired men following. They watched until the riders disappeared, and only then did Elias allow himself to relax slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked Marion quietly. "I'm fine," she said, and he could hear the truth in her voice. "Better than fine. I'm free. He has no power over me anymore. Not his threats, not his manipulation, not his version of who I should be. I'm finally completely free." Elias pulled her close, and she leaned into him. The ranch hands began to disperse, returning to their various tasks, though Pete lingered for a moment. "That's the last we'll see of him," Pete predicted. "Man's got nothing left. He tried everything: manipulation, legal threats, intimidation. None of it worked. He's done." "I hope you're right," Elias said. "I'm right," Pete said confidently. "Trust me, boss. I've seen men like that before. They're only dangerous when they think they might win. Once they know they've lost, they slink away to lick their wounds and find easier targets." Pete proved correct. Edward Blackwell left New Mexico Territory the next day, and they never heard from him again. Word filtered back through various channels that he'd returned to Boston, where he quietly married the daughter of another wealthy family, a woman whose father controlled enough political influence to make up for Edward's tarnished reputation. It was by all accounts a strategic marriage rather than a romantic one, exactly what Edward had tried to make his relationship with Marion. The final 2 weeks before the wedding passed without further incident. James Catherine and William Cole arrived 5 days early, traveling by train to Santa Fe and then by coach to Los Alamos. Marion's reunion with her mother was tearful and joyful, with Catherine repeatedly hugging her daughter while exclaiming how well she looked, how happy she seemed. William, a cheerful 22-year-old who worked in his father's business, took to ranch life with enthusiasm. He followed Elias everywhere, asking endless questions about cattle ranching, land management, and life in the territory. By the second day, he was helping with actual ranch work, and Elias found himself genuinely enjoying the young man's company. Catherine Cole was everything Elias had expected, based on knowing Marion intelligent, practical, with a warmth that balanced James's intensity. She examined the ranch house with a critical eye, but her verdict was positive. "It's a good home," she told Elias privately. "Solid, well-maintained, room for a family to grow, and more importantly, my daughter is happy here. I can see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. She's found something real. I'll spend my life making sure she stays happy, Elias promised. I believe you will, Catherine said. Just remember, happiness isn't something you give someone. It's something you build together. Keep listening to her, respecting her, treating her as a partner. That's what matters. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with autumn colors painting the mountains and a crisp coolness in the air that promised good weather. The Los Alamos church was packed with townspeople, ranch hands, and the few family members who'd made the long journey. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself with decorations, wildflowers, and autumn leaves, creating a simple but beautiful setting. Marian wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Henderson and several other women had helped her make. It wasn't as elaborate as her Boston wardrobe had been, but it was perfect for her elegant, practical, beautiful in its simplicity. She carried wildflowers that Elias had picked that morning from the high meadow. Thomas Cole walked her down the aisle, and Elias felt his breath catch when he saw her. She was radiant, glowing with happiness, and when their eyes met, he saw his entire future reflected in her gaze. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Pastor William spoke about partnership, about choosing each other every day, about building a life based on respect and love, rather than obligation and expectation. When it came time for vows, Elias spoke from the heart. Marian, you walked into my life when I was literally burning everything I touched. You fixed my kitchen, organized my chaos, and somehow, along the way, you fixed me too. You made me believe in possibilities I'd stopped imagining. I promise to respect your choices, to value your partnership, to stand beside you in all things. I promise to let you stir the pot literally and figuratively for as long as we both shall live. The congregation laughed at the callback to that first morning, and Marian's eyes filled with happy tears. Elias, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. I came west running from heartbreak and found something infinitely better. A true partnership, honest work, and a love I didn't know existed. You've never asked me to be anything but myself. You've given me freedom, respect, and a home in every sense of the word. I promise to build this life with you, to share the work and the joy, to be your partner in all things. I promise to keep improving your cooking, though I make no guarantees about the eggs. More laughter, and then Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife. The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up outside and more food than seemed possible. Marian and Catherine had cooked for days, assisted by Mrs. Henderson and half the women in Los Alamos. There was music. Danny played fiddle surprisingly well, and several townspeople joined in with guitars and harmonicas. Dancing laughter toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously embarrassing. James Cole stood to give a toast, and the crowd quieted to hear him. When my daughter wrote to tell me she was leaving Boston to work as a cook in the New Mexico territory, I thought she'd lost her mind, he said honestly. When I received a telegram claiming she was being held against her will, I was on the next train west, ready to rescue her from whatever situation she'd fallen into. He paused, looking at Marian and Elias with obvious affection. Instead, I found that she'd rescued herself. She'd found honest work, good people, and a man worthy of her. I'd worried about her future, but I can see now that her future is exactly what she's chosen: a life of meaning, purpose, and love. Elias, welcome to the family. Take care of my daughter, though I suspect she'll be taking care of you just as much. He raised his glass. To Marian and Elias, may your partnership be long, your love be strong, and your kitchen be forever free of burnt eggs. As the sun set behind the Jemez Mountains, painting the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple, Elias and Marian stood together watching their wedding celebration. Friends, family, ranch hands, everyone they cared about gathered in one place, celebrating not just a wedding, but a new beginning. Happy? Elias asked, pulling Marian close. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Marian said. This morning I was Marian Cole. Now I'm Marian Mercer, and somehow that feels more like my true name than any I've had before. Mrs. Mercer, Elias said, testing it out. I like the sound of that. So do I, Marian agreed, though I expect the ranch hands will still call me Miss Cole for months out of habit. Danny already placed bets on how long it takes Pete to remember, Elias said, grinning. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue. William was dancing with one of the Henderson daughters, clearly smitten. James and Catherine sat together talking with Thomas and looking utterly content. Pete and the other ranch hands were entertaining a group of townspeople with some story that involved dramatic gestures and lots of laughter. "Thank you," Marion said suddenly. "For what?" Elias asked. "For seeing me," she said. Not the version of me that Edward wanted, or the version Boston society expected, but the actual me. The person who likes organizing things and solving problems and creating something meaningful with my own hands. For letting me be that person without trying to change me. "That's the only person I've ever wanted," Elias said. "The woman who walked into my smoke-filled kitchen and said, 'Move over, I'll stir the pot.' That's who I fell in love with. That's who I married. That's who I'll choose every single day for the rest of my life." Marion kissed him, then right there in front of everyone, and the wedding guests cheered and whistled. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, Marion rested her head on Elias's shoulder. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Elias said. "Now we live. We build our life together. We work the ranch, expand the operation with your brilliant ideas. We argue about fence repairs and cattle prices. We burn dinner occasionally. Well, I'll burn it. You'll fix it. We have children maybe if we're lucky. We grow old together. We choose each other every single day." "That sounds perfect," Marion said. "Absolutely perfect." And it was. The years that followed proved them right. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Marion's organizational skills and business acumen complementing Elias's practical knowledge and hard work. They expanded their cattle operation, added a small horse breeding program, and became one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Children came first, a daughter they named Catherine after Marion's mother, then twin boys who inherited their father's height and their mother's stubborn determination. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Marion's cottage became a guest house for the frequent visits from family and friends. James and Catherine Cole moved to Santa Fe 5 years after the wedding, wanting to be closer to their daughter and grandchildren. James became an investor in several New Mexico businesses, bringing his Boston business acumen to the growing territory. William eventually followed, establishing his own trading company in Albuquerque and finding a wife among the local families. Pete remained head ranch hand until he was too old to ride, at which point he transitioned to managing the books and training younger hands. Danny grew into a reliable worker and eventually became foreman. Sam and Jake stayed on for years, becoming fixtures of the ranch and surrogate uncles to the Mercer children. Mrs. Henderson continued to be a pillar of Los Alamos society and one of Marion's closest friends. Thomas Cole ran his store until he was 73, at which point he handed it over to his son and spent his remaining years bouncing grandnieces and grandnephews on his knee while telling them exaggerated stories about the old days. Edward Blackwell faded into irrelevance, his name mentioned less and less until it was forgotten entirely. His strategic marriage apparently brought him political connections, but little personal happiness, though by that point neither Marion nor Elias cared enough to follow his story. But that was all in the future. On that perfect autumn evening, with the celebration continuing around them and stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, Elias and Marion simply held each other and marveled at how far they'd come. From a smoke-filled kitchen and a woman at the end of her rope, to this, a partnership built on respect, a love built on honesty, a life built on choices they'd made together. "I love you, Mrs. Mercer," Elias said softly. "I love you too, Mr. Mercer," Marion replied. "Now and always." Somewhere in the celebration, Danny's fiddle struck up a new tune and couples began pairing off for another dance. Elias extended his hand to his wife. "May I have this dance?" "You may have every dance," Marion said, taking his hand, "for the rest of our lives." And as they moved together under the New Mexico stars, surrounded by everyone they loved, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for. Not perfection. Life was never perfect, but something better, something real, something worth fighting for. A partnership, a home, a love that would last a lifetime. And it all began with 4 simple words on a smoke-filled morning: "Move over, I'll stir the pot." The end.